Also realize how ridiculously autumnal I look on this thing. Like literally,
Yes. Have you been chopping wood?
Literally, like I might as well just have my axe spear on my shoulder, like and a stack of wood. I'm a little pumpkin latte or something. Like honestly.
Let's see if I can remember how this goes. Welcome to Thinking Deeply about Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Lloyd Williams-Jones.
Hello there.
And together, we're going to explore the implementation of an effective reading program.
Yeah, I reckon that's a fair way to describe it.
In primary school. First, Lloyd, what you reading for?
Hey, what you reading for?
So I've had the pleasure of reading The Power of Teams by Sam Crome. Now, Sam is an extremely well-read and he's an expert, I would say. He's an expert in his field of teams and culture in schools. And he is he's still working on the ground and still doing it, and how he's carved the time out to be so well read with this book. I mean, it's just come at the right time for me, and it is also it's magnificently written. It's written so coherently and so concisely that it's just every drop is gold. You know, I'm only a couple of chapters in, because I'll tell you for why. Is because myself and Lucy have decided after our sort of now we've done our professional qualifications, we want to continue the culture of sort of professional learning between us. So we've decided to do this as a book study between us. So I have a regular meeting with Lucy on a Monday, and the first part of that meeting will be exploring like a chapter of the book, or maybe a section of the book that we decide to pre-read before coming to the meeting. So it's to keep us sharp as well, and it's brilliant because it's making us really reflect about our team culture and about what we do, and it's keeping us extremely honest and thinking about our psychological safety in our school and all these different aspects that are just probed so well. And like I say, I'm not even that far in, and it's already had a profound effect. It's already had an impact on decisions we've made as a leadership team. So I thank you to Sam really for writing this book, and I know he's an excellent speaker as well. I haven't managed to see him yet. It's on my list to go and connect with, but he's written a really excellent book here, and I would recommend it highly to any leader or teacher, that matter. Really, I think everybody who can benefit from understanding what makes effective teams and effective like team culture in schools. So, Kieran, what you reading for?
Yeah, I remember Shannon flagging Sam. It was a research ed Surrey a couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah,
possibly, or Berkshire. I can't remember which one exactly. But yeah, I need to get a copy of that. Maybe I'll borrow yours when you're finished.
Definitely.
Or maybe I'll buy it. Because that's probably the right thing to do.
I think we owe him to buy it.
So mine is, I mean, I feel like I've read this before. I certainly haven't recommended it before, but it's called "Did the Vikings Really Have Helmets with Horns? Sources and Narrative Content in Swedish Upper Primary School History Teaching." And it's by Martin Stolar or Stolare. Not really sure how the emphasis is put on the last E. But essentially, it's an exploration of curricular decision-making and subject knowledge, the difference between sort of the procedural aspects of subjects and the narrative aspect of the subject. So, well worth a read. very interesting, and I think it's very short as well. And it's from 2015. We're just off season 6. We're back with our chat episodes. I thought it'd be really interesting to find out, Lloyd, about how you have implemented it doesn't feel like a program, but you have taken an approach to the teaching of reading based on the work of Christopher Such. You had access to his ideas just before they were published, and so that helped shape how you do things at your school. And I thought it'd be really good to explore what that looks like after 2 and a bit years. So I think it makes sense for the first question to be, what have you done?
Like you said, Kieran, I was very fortunate to have an early access to Chris's thinking, really. And it was quite clear at the time of him writing that that book was very much needed for the primary sector, as we've mentioned before on the podcast. And I came to the school and taking the first look at kind of what was going on with reading, it was a mishmash of vipers hell, to be quite honest with you. And it didn't really have any clear direction. It felt a bit like everything was a bit flash in the pan. It's not to say people weren't trying really hard with things, because I like the staff of my school do try really, really hard with things, and they were giving it the best go. We just didn't have a really clear kind of a way. We try and everything we do, we try and embody like the Staplehurst way. And, everything we do is this is how we do it, and try and put our stamp on things. I think it's really important as well. Like when you're considering implementing things in a school, is that you make things your own and you make it your way. And that might be some slight deviations from contextual deviations from the like core implementation, but not too far. And we'll talk about that a bit later on. But like you do need to contextualize and make it yours. And Chris was incredibly supportive in the process. And I kind of said to him early on, look, we need to do this, because I identified it was early on, and we needed to move quickly on it, because it was in the middle of lockdown, and that there were pros and cons to that. It kind of gave us a little bit of thinking space and a bit of room to maneuver, if you will. So at times are a little bit different, as we all experienced, but it was really important actually for us that we had that maneuverability, and then Chris's support as well. And I said to him, I want to be an early adopter of this, and because as we know, that it's quite seminal now already, that work. And I think like we knew straight away from reading it. I was like, oh my days, this is what we've needed in the sector for like a long time. And it just made complete sense. So I wanted to get going on it. Now, looking back at it, we did have to move quicker, because we were imminent Ofsted, and we were a requires improvement school, which has implications, However, my mantra is always about long, steady, carefully implemented interventions. Whatever it is you're trying to do it carefully, and do it at a reasonable pace. Now, looking back at this, are there things I would have changed about the way we implemented it? Perhaps, but we were in a very strange time, and we were all doing the best we could, I think. So, but I think it's important to caveat kind of what I explained today with a little bit of that, that we just need to remember the time this was done, and kind of and how that kind of context affected the pace of implementation, I should say. So having looked at it and sort of thought, right, it's not really in the place we needed to be, and with reading being at the core of the framework and so vitally important in schools for every subject, I knew we had to act quite quickly on this. And this was one that didn't fall into my sort of strategic curriculum development plan. This was a pick up and attack kind of subject, which sometimes I feel there is a place for a pick up and attack and you have to do that if your core stuff is needing that attention, then attack it, because that stuff's got to be in place before you start jazzing up your history. I don't, I think we know that it all leads from reading. So having looked at what our offer was and our kind of our culture and our reading diet, it was clear that there was just no real consensus across the staff as to like what the approach was and like why. It was the why that was missing. And actually, I don't know that at the time when I first saw it, that I had the why, because like I don't think anybody had outlined properly the why. The why at the time was, as like Chris and Neil have alluded to in previous episodes, was like SATs and the kind of manufactured kind of inference question cycle, that had kind of developed into this like sort of beast that had invaded every school in the land, and that was what they were my mental models. So I was kind of thinking to myself, okay, I sort of understand what you're trying to do here, but this still lacks a little bit of like rationale for me, and like I can't quite see the vision of this subject and like what's going on here. And then Chris's book, well, he decided to write it. We egged him on to write it, and he wrote it, and it just beautifully synthesized all of the research and presented me the answer, to what was needed as a solution to kind of really remedy the sort of the lack of kind of rationale and the lack of direction for reading in the school. I think that's important to say, is that, and I must say this, like, I'm not for 1 minute saying that the teachers weren't working hard or doing a good job at what they were doing. They were. It's just the kind of the top down view of reading in the school wasn't, it was just disorganized, and that kind of rigor, which I'll talk about later on, which the approach really employs, was lacking. So we decided to crack straight on with training our teachers up as best we could in the lockdown. A lot of it was done remotely. We did it as much as we could in the first instance of laying all the theoretical side of things down. And then when we were able to get back into school and school started to return to normal, and we were able to actually practice things and able to try things out and start to really work with children, then we were able to sort of really establish our canon for reading and our sort of reading behaviors and the structures of our lessons and how it's all organized and laid out in his book, and put it to task and start to sort of see what worked, what didn't work. And it was really useful because I was able to use Chris as a sounding board during this, which I think he found quite useful as well, in a way that it was feedback for him from the ground, kind of as to what it looked like what a scaled kind of implementation of his approach looked like, and like what were the teething problems, because there always is, isn't it? We know when we do any implementation, we've got a factor for a bit of flex and responsiveness in it with the active ingredients, to ensure that we sort of mitigate the things that pop up in front of us that we perhaps couldn't have seen when we did all our planning, and sort of laid the kind of pathway out for staff before. So it started to become quite clear what we needed to address and how we needed to move on it. But my reading lead at the time, Alina, she's since moved on to another school now. She's taken on an early years lead role. She's a fantastic practitioner and a fantastic reading lead at that. And she drove this with me, and her attention to detail and her ability to close loops is what I'm going to say. Her ability to close a loop, it was astonishing. Like, she just knew how to follow up, and not in a kind of draconian way, but in a, oh yeah, do you need a bit more support with that? Oh, we checked in on that last week. I'm just going to pop back, and using a leadership time every week religiously to follow up. And that kind of low stakes loop closing was was instrumental in how we moved the reading forward. So over that period of kind of a year and a half, I want to say, after the lockdown, where we were able to get back on the ground and really start practicing our reading behaviors and our, all of those sessions and bedding them in. And she was just there to be able to land it and alongside me. So we were able to QA and land it and work on it as it went, and then able to get those structures in. And I think staff were, they were just really, they were happy. They were really pleased to see a real clear approach and support. And I think the follow-up support as well, which was so important to land something like that, because it's big, like you're talking a subject you're going to teach every day for at least half an hour. That's a big implementation, isn't it? We know, like, we're not just talking about perhaps history, which is done an hour a week or whatever. We're talking about a substantial subject here. So staff were obviously a little bit nervous to begin with, but we then moved to embedding all of the structures, all of the reading structures, and we did that in a phased way, which I'll talk about later on. But we moved to embed the whole of the approach. And teachers bought in, and that's kind of what the journey the school went on. We'd come from this place where we were a bit rudderless, to a point where we were sailing, we were really on our way. And it felt like that, it really kind of felt like that walking around the school and talking to people. There was a kind of feeling of like, oh yeah, like reading. I had like teaching assistants asking me if they could have a copy of Chris's book and things, because they were so interested in the kind of direction that the reading was going. And I think that's testament to the quality of the approach, really. So
no teaching assistants asked if they want a copy of my book. No,
yours had sold out, mate. So
disappointing. I mean, in all seriousness, I think this speaks to why the conversation about implementation is perhaps not as developed as other parts of the discourse on education. Because, right, if I followed you correctly through that, you've identified what it was you wanted to change and how you want to change it. You've then clarified it. You've explained it and perhaps modeled it virtually because of the sort of constraints of the time. You've tested it, you've followed up, you've made incremental improvements, you developed it, and then you've embedded it. And that doesn't fit on a poster. And so, maybe it does, but people like threes and they remember threes. You've got quite a few things there to think about. And it just shows, it's not messy, but it's not succinct either. There's a lot to that. How have you gone about actually doing this?
A lovely way to summarize it, really. I think I'll echo what you said there. I believe implementation is one of the things we talk about probably the least in education, certainly in the primary sector. And for me, it's probably one of the most important things, certainly in school improvement and schools that need improving, it's the how you do it. And there's, like I've said this before when I've spoken live, there's so much excellent content and principles and books and studies and things that we can use in schools, but workmen and tools and all that. And it's how it gets enacted. It's how do you actually get this across and successful and, like you said, embedded and sustained. And it is just it's a persistent problem in schools, isn't it? And it's one of those ones where I don't know that you never finish the job really as such. You constantly review and iterate and review, but it's something, I feel like we need to give this more airtime because it's so important. And I just can't stress enough how much I value when I read a blog or I read a book or I read or I talk to someone, hear a talk in a conference or something, and someone really outlines like how they've done something. For me as a leader, they are the most sort of valuable bits of learning that I do. I like hearing and just and especially hearing when people get things wrong and like go, that didn't work. And you know, we found this really, really hard and this didn't work. You know, being really honest and reflective about it and going, okay, yeah, you know, because we can all paint a picture, can't we? We can all paint a picture on social media or even here now, on this podcast. I'd be painting some picture here, and you know, we're all painting a picture of what our kind of ideals are and what, you know, what we think we've done. But ultimately, the more honest we are with that, and the more reflective we can be, I just think the profession benefits from it immensely. And I encourage and sort of will continue to seek the sort of to read you know, those blogs and about the studies and listen to those podcasts where people do have that kind of thinking.
That was a big part of why I asked Rachel Ball and Shannon to take part in season 6, because they both are very keen to talk about what they're actually doing. You know, obviously I was asking them about general principles, but then it's what did those principles look like? And they were very, very keen to talk about where things had gone wrong. I almost asked them similar questions on some of their some of the sections of their episodes. And yeah, I mean, if you're looking for examples of people who talk about what they do, how they do it, you know, look no further than Rachel and Shannon.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Those two are definitely in the same way of thinking as I am, and I know you are, Kieran, and very tuned into the how. And I think, you know, I think that's probably why I value them so highly as well, you know, because they do that so well. And I think it's so important to be able to try and learn from others about, you know, to try and help you, prevent you from perhaps making those mistakes, isn't it? It's like we do with children, isn't it? We try and look for misconceptions. We try to look at other models where perhaps things didn't work or have worked, but didn't quite, you know, wasn't the optimum way of doing it or whatever, and learning from that and going, right, if we try and do that, maybe we can mitigate for that thing that I learned from that leader because X, Y, and Z, you know. And I do, for me, that's smart leadership, that's intelligent leadership, and that's the way we should be as leaders, is reflective and not inward, but like outward looking, outward facing, and thinking, right, what did you do? How did you do that? Right. And not being egotistical about that, and sort of saying that actually we all do mess up sometimes, and sometimes we have these wonderful ideas and these, you know, and we make them look great on social media, and we make them into a talk, and we do this and we do that, and sometimes they don't pan out in the long run to be the right thing. And because we're all making, it's cost benefit, we're all making decisions, aren't we, all the time in schools. The best decisions we can make is informed by the evidence, but also informed by the experiences of other leaders as well. And I think that's important to always take into account. Like, I'm not saying go fly blind, but consider the research, consider what others have done in the field as well that might have caused problems. And that's why I like learning from people like Shannon and Rachel and many others as well. That you know, that makes you a more reflective leader. So I kind of had that in my head when I was. I kind of feel like I've always had that in my head. That's kind of how I operate as a leader, right? I like, it's part of my values in terms of trying to be honest about making mistakes and learning and listening to other people as well, and also trying not to invest too much of, because it's very easy for us as leaders and as you know, as people who speak at conferences and do other things like that, to invest ourselves into something very, very heavily, because we wholeheartedly believe it, and then for it to perhaps not turn out, like I said before, the way you hoped it had. Now, with the reading approach, this was something that it felt big. It just felt big. This did, like, this shift. And I mean, we've seen the kind of impact of Chris's book far and wide, and I feel like might have hedged my bet correctly, perhaps, on that one, by taking on board what he was saying and putting it to ground. And you said there about us doing a mixture of a mixture in our implementation. At that point, I hadn't quite refined our current model, which I might just touch on later. But we did, we were thinking of this reading implementation as a long, thin approach. We were thinking of it like that. It's just we didn't have the mechanism in place at that point like that we do now. But we did have a mechanism as in our staff meetings, and we decided to commit time, a good chunk of time to making sure this worked. Was very fortunate, and I know Chris shares these freely. It might be on his blog, but to have his instructional videos, and also the videos of him actually teaching the structured lesson. So the close read, the fluency read, the extended reads, those sessions are all filmed by him, and he shared those with us. So we were able to look at what a good one looked like, if you will, and our staff were able to see it. And I mean, I was in training 2 weeks ago where we watched all those videos again with our mentors and our mentees, and it's one of the most priceless things you can do is commit things to video, and have a shared centrally stored area that is available wherever, not even in school and out of school, for people to be able to go back to and revisit things. And that was a huge part of helping our staff to feel like they were doing the right thing, because that's what people want to do. They want to feel like they're doing things right. That's how teachers aim to please. I genuinely feel like that. I certainly did when I was teaching, and I know others want to do a good job, and to have the ability to check back against a success criteria almost, to check what were the active ingredients for a fluency read. Well, I'm going to watch Chris do it again for 10 minutes, and then I'm just going to double check against my practice and go, oh yeah, I forgot to reread that bit twice, because it's human for us to forget the odd thing or slightly change something and forget that you've changed it away from its core purpose. So having the ability to go back to something and refresh and revise, like Pep says, was really helpful in getting it to ground. So we spent time doing that. We also sort of phased it as well. And this was on Chris's advice as well at the time. This was prior to me really getting my teeth into implementation. He suggested that, we didn't just jump into the 3 sessions, the fluency read, the close read, the extended read. We just worked on the fluency read for 2-3 weeks, and we reviewed it, and we came back and we shared teething problems, and, and then we scale. So that kind of scalability is really, really important to consider, when you're laying things down, when things are going to ground. And that really helped manage our teachers' cognitive load, and their ability to process things, and, to automate some of that stuff as well in the classroom, because shifting teacher behavior is we know that from the research that is challenging. So that really, really supported the process, and having those review points as well, and coming back and really being honest and reflective and saying, this one works, this one we're really struggling on the timing for this one, or and really refining things so that we got it to a point where everybody had it down pretty tight. But in terms of sort of how we do things now, there's a lot of similarities probably to that. There's a couple of changes in terms of the mechanisms, in terms of how we would continue to follow up, like using instructional coaching and so on. But at the time, I feel like we did okay, considering the climate we were in, and the fact that we had to, like I said, we had to move quite quickly with that, to make sure that, not just for Ofsted, but that the reading offer was solid for our children, so that we could build the rest of our curriculum on that kind of cornerstone, if you will.
Nice. So it's you had the toothpaste, but you had a really old toothbrush, and you need to upgrade that toothbrush for it to be effective, if we're going to stick with the metaphor.
Exactly.
I mean, recently I have been thinking a lot about the last project I did, because we're replicating it in a different part of the country. And so I've been thinking about what advice I can give to the person who is now doing a similar role to what I was across my 3 schools. And the more I think about it, the clearer the distinction between things I would recommend other people do and things I would recommend people don't do becomes clearer and clearer, because you got this rose tinted vision of how things went. You sort of, I don't know, you probably from an evolutionary standpoint have to cut out some of the stuff that didn't go particularly well. So I think the role of context in this, anyone listening and thinking, can I do exactly what Lloyd has done? And you're thinking, can I do exactly what Chris has done? That word doesn't exist, and it's a case of, talking about Rachel and Shannon, examples of implementation gone right and wrong, and how we can, take everything we see and then try and refine what we do. And that's how you get to that point where you can't remember the mistakes you made, because it becomes, like you say, the Staplehurst way. It becomes a part of who your identity as a school and as a leader. So, I'm almost thinking as you're speaking, if anyone else is in a similar position to you and they want to share their experience, it might be good to collate like a massive bank. So if anyone is keen to, just email me and say, I want to chat about our reading, the changes we made to reading, that would be really good, because I think, there is no one way to do this, but what you've done is you have taken several years to refine how you do it. Hopefully getting to the point where pupils are getting a really high quality reading education. And we know that given the demographic of your school, literacy levels are particularly important, because they can be, I don't know, not a societal blocker, but they can exacerbate certain things that are already prevalent. I don't know how best to describe that. And obviously, you're the expert in that field and your school's sort of catchment. So do correct me if I say anything that's probably, that is off the mark. But I think literacy is important for everyone, and the ability to read is important for everyone. But in certain instances, it can be extra important. What has been the impact?
Obviously that was it was a lot of work, and looking back now, I think like I would have written a proper implementation plan for it, and carefully sort of laid out my markers and kind of what I want and the points I wanted to check. At the time, my thinking wasn't as developed in that field, and I think I can say I was a little bit more kind of freewheeling it, not freewheeling it, because that's probably the wrong way to say it, but like I was a little bit more loose with my like kind of bigger strategic oversight than I am now, and that's through just learning the hard way, where things perhaps haven't gone quite as they should have, to kind of think about that, think about things a bit more coherently and with those mechanisms in mind.
But you just become deputy head, hadn't you? Because I remember you driving past my house in lockdown, saying you've been in the interview, and you were like,
it was your car. it was honestly, it was one of the earliest things I did as part of my role. So I was a novice deputy. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I had a lot of reading behind me, but not a lot of practical application in terms of like how to do it. And I just, like I said, go back to that, just how important that is, the how, and my mental models have shifted enormously in the last four years in that front. And I went into it and was like, right, well, hang on, I knew we needed to move on it. So I just sort of forged it and pushed it, which is interesting because going back to the Sam's book, how you buy people in, and we got certain year groups to trial and feedback at the early adopters and things in terms of coming up and getting staff buy-in and things, and we definitely did loads of these things right. There were things we could have done better without a shadow of a doubt, and how knowing what I know now about how we put things to ground and how many things staff were juggling at the time. But we were in a tough spot. We were a requires improvement school coming out the back of a pandemic, with imminent Ofsted. That position wasn't a tickle, and our staff knew that, and we knew we had to dig deep to to shift things that needed to move before the inspection and so on. So we did work hard. We did work hard, and I acknowledge and recognize and respect the staff that I worked with through that period for being able to really commit and do it for children. They did it for children, so children can read better. And so what's the impact? Our children read better. We were able to bring about real rigor and a systematic approach. We brought in the heart of reading to the school. That's what I feel we did. We literally were here, the heart and soul of reading returned to the school. And it was you could feel, like I said earlier, that it came from that. And because children were talking about reading and the new lessons, and we, some of the iterations have been, which wasn't in Chris's book, things like I've mentioned it before, where we have the reading symbol and there's a reading element in every lesson. And, all these things kind of were born from this approach. And we looked carefully at, tracking fluency and accuracy, and we got insight, and we decided we record all that centrally. And that when we look at and discuss a child at a pupil progress meeting for their reading, we look at their fluency, their accuracy, their prosody, their NFER score, and we talk to the teacher. And, so there's 6-7 points of discussion there that form a signal about the child's reading. It's not an exact science. Nothing is. It's noisy and messy. We know this. But it gives us a bit of a steer on where our children are, and we can see that they're making gains with it, and that coupled with kind of a rigor with our phonics. Phonics was in a good shape, actually. It wasn't too bad. We just tightened it a bit, and that coupled with that kind of tracking of children all the way to year 6, not letting your foot off the gas with ensuring children have ample opportunity to learn to read, and to continue to champion that for all children. All children are in that bracket. They all deserve that offer. And I feel we brought that offer through this implementation and this approach. And for me, that I was very proud of that. And I was very proud of Alina for driving that because ultimately she did the legwork on this. She led it. She followed it up. I helped steer her a bit, and I put her in sort of in connection with the right material and people, and she flew. And so the school, we did as readers and as a school, and and I think thankfully that was recognized. And not that we do it for Ofsted, of course we don't. We do it for children, and that's my first and foremost. The impact is where I would start. There is we've given children a better offer, a better chance, like you say, accessing more learning, more opportunities in their lives, right? That's why. But fortunately, we were also recognized by the inspectorate as well that we were doing an okay job with our reading as well. And that reflected in the report. And I had no worry whatsoever when Alina took the inspector around. I just knew the inspector would see what we'd done, and I knew she'd be able to explain that and narrate that so coherently, and she did. And so I think looking at just reflecting back to where it was when I stepped in to then where it was at that point, it was seismic, the difference in our rigor and our, just the whole reading approach was just ours, and it was there. And that felt nice. That felt good because we'd worked so hard as a team on it. And, we'd thought about when things had gone wrong, and we'd listened and we'd amended and iterated but come back to the core principles of what effective reading instruction looks like, and revisited the research and thought, right, hang on, well, we can't change that much, because then we're coming away we're slipping back into there was all these sorts of conversations that happened in meetings and when we had our review points and things, and and you've got to allow that stuff to happen in proper implementation. You've got to allow things to breathe a bit, because again, going back to what the buy-in and that kind of effective sort of bedding in of anything, staff need to be able to feed back properly what they are finding hard. Because for like any leader, we can say, right, here's a great thing. this is a great approach. Here's all the research shows this is a great approach. Right, go. And we just know that there's going to be things that come up that are so specific and unique to a setting that we can go, well, there's no answer for that in the book, and like I say, very fortunate to be able to reflect and to speak with Chris on those issues. Just helped us to steer the ship a little bit better. But ultimately, the impact has been our children read more. They read a lot more now than they did 4 years ago. And that stemmed from kind of, I can't remember if it was Neil or said about taking a year 3 child or year 4 child and just track what they actually read in a day. How much actual reading do they do? And I think that we did that and realized actually it was slim pickings, and the way to be a better reader is to do loads more reading fundamentally. So that's how we kind of orchestrated our, that impact through upping the mileage and making sure that was done in a way which developed good reading behaviors. And I genuinely feel we've moved significantly.
I think it's really important that you mentioned Ofsted, because my follow-up was going to be, right, okay, when a reading leader or a teacher or a school leader are listening to this and they're thinking, right, impact, they're thinking 3 things. The school's own assessment of how reading's going, how pupils are performing in reading, how they read, what Ofsted says, what Ofsted thinks, and SATs. Those are the 3 things that you're thinking about. These are the 3 ways in which my performance as subject leader can be judged. These are the 3 ways in which the school can be sort of externally judged. How does this impact? So I think it's important, It's crazy to think that we could be looking back at the last couple of years as the golden age of Ofsted, sooner rather than later, which is, remember that time when they were slightly evidence informed. Well, obviously that's an episode for another time, but it's great that they're looking and recognizing that the more pupils read, that's a good proxy for sort of effective reading instruction. I don't know. That's obviously summarizing Chris's words in many fewer words than he would probably like me to, but it all boils down to that. What's the frequency? You're not going to get better if you don't. SATs takes a long time for that to start to trickle through, So I'm not going to say, so Lloyd, what were your SAT results in the last X number, especially with the cohorts that have just gone through? I think it's going to be maybe 10 years from to 2030, and we'll have stopped saying, oh well, this cohort may not have been impacted by the pandemic, really, because the kids who miss nursery are nowhere near taking their key stage 2 assessments, and etc. So I do think it's important, because those are the yardsticks against which schools measure themselves and are measured. In the past, one of the biggest challenges I've had to overcome has been an ideological opposition to the use of textbooks. And a lot of my time is spent outlining the reasons why the ideological position against might not be the most evidence informed, and might be misinformed. I don't know, but obviously I do it in a much nicer way than that. I'm not as blunt as saying this is, there's more you could be considering here. But it is a conversation I have had to have, and it is work that I've had to do over an extended period of time to bring everyone along with me. What challenges have you had to overcome during the implementation here?
Sort of, again, to jump on what you were talking about there in terms of people being wary or hesitant around something new. I mean, I understand it, given that the kind of legacy of school improvement, as I've talked about before, is that potentially in places we've had a lot of change. Right, this is the new thing. Right, that's not any good anymore. Right, this is the new thing now. Right, and things being picked up and dropped and not de-implemented, if you will, properly. And that teachers have been burned by that. That's that kind of thinking, and particularly more experienced teachers I speak towards here now, teachers who've been in the game 10, 15, 20, 30 years. They've seen things come and go because they've seen brain gym, they've seen learning styles, they've seen all those voting pad things. Remember them, the Active Inspire voting things? Everybody had big boxes of them in classes, and all the kids were voting A, B, and C. Yeah, they've seen all of those things come through. So I kind of get why they're wary, and I understand like why. This is a new thing, which is, again, I talked a little bit earlier about those early adopters, about getting some key staff on board to feed back in sessions about how they're finding it, warts and all, and be prepared to be and have enough psychological safety in your team to be able to have that culture where people go, yeah, this isn't quite working for me at the moment. This works really well, And if you can get those teachers, those people who are very valuable, of immense expertise, who need to be listened to, on board to feedback like that, you start to turn the tide a little bit and prevent any kind of downward spiraling, if you will, where, when new things come in. And I think that was something we did. So like we scaled, like I said, and we thought carefully about who would be picked to be feeding back on fluency sessions or extended reads or whatever. And that really helped. It really, really, that started to shift. But in the first instance, there were some teachers who were just sort of, just like, this is another change, and again, that's another reason why we have shifted our approach, our school approach to professional development so significantly with that in mind. That very much plays a central role to some of the reasons why if we want to change teacher behavior, we need to always consider that. Workload was another challenge. Like we were in a lockdown, and we were coming out of a lockdown. We were trying to put school back together, and we were doing a new reading scheme approach. And it's kind of like, that's a lot, and we knew that. So we had to try and do everything we could to try and make things as easy as they can for teachers. Where you can make things the path of least resistance, do it. Planning days, they help. They're a lot of work, they're a lot of resource, they're expensive, but they're there to support implementation. That's why we do them. That was a real consideration for us. The videos, they support workload because they're there as a central resource to go back to. Yeah. Anything we created, like centralized stored texts and things, text extracts for all the year groups that we helped to support. Now, are we out of the woods on that one yet? No, we're not. We still got work to do there, and we'll probably talk about sort of some things going forward in a bit. But that workload, people were like, "Oh, this is a new." I'm trying to teach. I'm trying to reconnect with teaching in this classroom again, and this, I've got this to consider as well. Now, in a perfect world, I would say, well, actually, do you know what? We'll just lighten up on this. We'll take our time. We couldn't take our time because for two reasons. One, children, they only get one crack through school, and two, we were an RI school, and it's like I said, it's no tickle being in an RI school. It's you've got to dig in. You have got to try and change things for children, and so we did have to move on it. So that I'm looking back on that, I reflect on that. I would love for the pace of that to have been slowed a bit and to have thinned it a little bit, and to have and perhaps we didn't get that quite right, but we did the best we could in the context that we were in. And and I hope staff knew that at the time, and we did try to narrate that as much as possible, that this is the situation, and and we did come through the other side, and we were stronger as a team for it. I feel that. But like, again, I'm not going to paint it all roses, because it's not. Like, school improvement is just not. It's not all roses. It's, like you said earlier, it's nuanced and it's sticky, and it can be ugly at times, but you as a leader, you do everything you can to mitigate all of that as best you can. and clear things up for people, and particularly the team underneath you. You know, look after them, like make sure they got what they need. Make sure you check in with them. Make sure that you listen to them, and properly listen to them. You know, does this work? You know, and trying to send out surveys and anonymous surveys and find out, like, you know, get the staff voice on it. What do they actually think of this? Like, do they think this is nonsense, or are they actually on board? So yeah, so that was, you know, there was some challenges there without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah, they were probably the main two things. Yeah, was initial reluctance from more experienced staff, and then some workload stuff that became. But I feel like, you know, we navigated it, and again we learned from it. I think, like I've said before, something that like has come out of IMBQs and something that Lucy always does as well is that pre-mortem thinking is so powerful. Like, before you do anything, anything you do, pre-mortem it. Like, if this goes wrong, what's the backup? What are we going to do? You know, like, and kind of nail that down, like codify it and say, right, like if this goes wrong, this is where we're going to, like, these are, there's a great blog. I can't remember who wrote it. I want to say it might be Stuart Locke, about kill points. And he talks about kill points, about like when is the time to like pull the plug, when things aren't just are not working. I think that's really smart leadership thinking. So, you know, I would say that they're things to consider when, you know, with any implementation. And we face challenges as everybody does, but I think it's hopefully like sharing some of that here, and like you said, encourage anybody else to I would love to hear more people's journeys and people's experiences and what they learned and what they got wrong. And yeah, and like you said, that bank or like further episodes just sounds great to me. But because, like I say, I look back and I look at decisions that I made as a leader, and I think, I probably would have done that differently now. And I think we always need to be like that. And if we lose that, it's a dangerous position that you can go to, you know, like where you lose that kind of ability to look back and ability in the moment as well to go, hang on, is this working? Like, when are we saying this is, you know, my ego can be removed from this, and we can just say, actually, we need to significantly change what we're doing here.
I think we also need to temper it, because, you know, I'm having flashbacks as you're talking there. I've only every school I've joined has been RI when I've joined, and rightly or wrongly, a good Ofsted grading gives you breathing space to develop. And so there are decisions you have to make when the only constant is change. I don't know where I got that from, but I've been banging on about that. You know, schools where the only constant is change, and there's a lack of trust in systems and in leadership, and you need to establish that, like you said, what you're doing is going to be here for the long haul. And we're just going to get slightly better at it as we go through. And yeah, so even though we look back and we say, oh yeah, I would have done that differently, at the time, it was probably the right decision to make, because there were extenuating factors that influenced the reasons why you made them, you know. So I think, yeah, being reflective is extremely important part of school leadership. But also there are different circumstances in which you have to lead in a slightly different way. And if that's implementing something quicker than you'd like to, just to get a minimal sort of standard. I mean, going back to textbooks, I was talking about, you know, it ensures this minimum quality of experience for pupils. It guarantees the story being told across their time in primary school is consistent and coherent. And then you can build all the lovely stuff on top of that, you know. And I'm sure there's sort of similar in other aspects of the curriculum. Although I can speak most confidently with regards to mathematics because of my recent experience. So yeah, so I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense. Like I say, I'm listening and I'm thinking, yeah, that's been there. And especially when you're waiting on that, you know the school is good. It just doesn't say it above the door or on your massive banner outside the school. And so, yeah, it's almost playing the waiting game so that then you can then make the decisions you want to make and know are the right decisions. And then as your leadership style develops, you know, you can become more assured in those. Because eventually you get to the point where you think, well, actually, I know what I'm doing is right. I can't wait to share that with Ofsted. But it takes a little.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think you hit on it perfectly there. Like it's a case of I think there's a lot of value in what you say about temper in there, because you do need to make the best decisions you can with the information you have and with the kind of leader that you are, don't you? You know, and I think you have to be confident in those decisions for your staff as well. I think, you know, you need to believe in what you're doing, because if you're too iterative or you're too reflective, you can end up tying yourself up in knots, which is absolutely right. And I think it's that kind of sweet spot in the middle, isn't it, between being kind of reflective and iterative and also planting your flag and saying, this is what we're going to do because here's the reasons why we're doing it, sort of thing. I would love to, I think you've really teased out like a point that I would love to hear more people talking about, or certainly talk to others about, with regards to that kind of school improvement in the under the cosh, if you will, you know, in those positions where we don't have time on our side, because you absolutely are 100% correct in the breathing space. And unfortunately, that is the system that we exist in, that we do have that, and things just shift. They do, no matter what anybody says. Schools shift to different places the minute that inspection finishes, and things just change pace, and you can start to do things a bit more sensibly, and you know, and so I would love to hear or even discuss with other leaders who have been in positions where they've gone in and you know, and made changes quickly, and how they do that, balancing against the implementation principles that we know to be so effective. Because I actually raised this on my MPQ and didn't get an answer. I got kind of shut down on it a little bit, because I was like, well, you know, in the current climate we're in, this is not. I understand, you know, and I'm all for. I am 100% for, of course, long, thin, sustained improvement, but our system doesn't lend to that all the time. And so for me, there's a little niggly point that I'd love to hear more about. So if there's anyone listening that would love to share their experiences on that, please get in touch with the show.
All this recommendation for long, thin, prudent professional or school improvement negates any comment about the existence of schools that are good but don't have good results, because you're not changing those results overnight. I mean, I've had experience where results have gone down before they've gone back up again and risen. You know, these kind of phenomena exist within those kind of situations. And so to be having conversations in the wider sphere about how it could be possible that these schools without 100% in their sort of end of key stage assessments could possibly be good schools is it flies in the face of the advice we're being given on a governmental and departmental level. So it is one for another time. And I think Teachers Under the Cosh or Leaders Under the Cosh would be a good series. You know, I'm sure we know plenty. I'm trying to think, racking through my head now who.
That's a little sub-series, if I've ever heard one. TDAPE, Leaders Under the Cosh.
We get Ross Kemp to do it. I'm Ross Kemp. No, I've got Teachers Under the Cosh.
I'm here in a school in the Midlands.
Who's she got against the Midlands?
I don't know. I went to the Midlands. Like, literally.
Maybe it goes all the way around the country. Here in East Anglia, I've got Adam Smith, teacher, RE expert.
He's been in the gang. He knows the gang. He's done the gang.
Oh, I wonder how much this is going to stay in, right?
Hopefully none of it. Also
right.
realize how ridiculously autumnal I look on this thing. Like,
yes.
literally,
have you been chopping wood?
Literally, like, I might as well just have my axe spear on my shoulder, like, and a stack of wood. I'm a little pumpkin latte or something, like, honestly.
Nice. Yeah, so maybe a very brief and pithy response to the final question.
Yeah, I'll keep it short.
What improvements would you like to make?
So I guess I keep this one short, really. The improvement I'd like to make is to continue to have fidelity to what we do. That is the biggest thing. It's one of the biggest challenges, I'd say, with any implementation you do, is how you just keep it going consistently all the time. New staff come in, people shift year groups, people move around, making sure that things happen exactly as they say on the tin is so key. And that's where we are currently, is just really revisiting, retightening up the stuff that we laid down so well in the first instance. It's like anything, isn't it? If you leave it go a bit. And it was really interesting because I haven't seen some of the slight mutations that had appeared in some of the reading lessons. I was thinking, that's not part of the extended read. And then, it's not through anybody's fault. It's just where teachers have kind of, they'd go in about their daily thing and something slightly changes, and it's so minor that they don't even register it almost. And then a couple of weeks later, something else just gives a little bit, and then something that lends to change in something else. All of a sudden, a year down the line, you look back at the original video and you go, "Ooh, we're not doing that right anymore. Hang on, let's just revisit." So having that ability to go back to, and that's what I said, like I said, how important those videos are, and that ability to go back and go, what do we expect to see? Do you do this in your teaching? Do I do this in my teaching? I teach reading every day. Do I do it? I go back and revisit those videos and go, am I still doing a fluency session correctly here? So that for me is like the improvement that I would make with it. Now we got work to do in terms of continuing to develop our reading culture and making sure children the love for reading and things, and celebrating reading at all levels. But in terms of the core purpose, bring it back to the original content with that fidelity.
Nice. That's a great answer, because there's no need to add stuff if it's not necessary. Big time. Yeah. One of my schools got to about 3 years and we thought, well, actually, we just need to get really good at what we've already established rather than introducing things that we're not really 100% certain about. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about this, Lloyd, and trip down memory lane in some aspects. Check this out for a segue. Reading is the language of humanity. Mathematics is the language of the cosmos. And on November 13th, I'm going to be running a webinar about number bonds, which are essentially the phonics of mathematics. And if you're in, I don't know, anywhere past the Middle East, between the Middle East and Australia, there's a version at 10:30 GMT. And if you're sort of on the other side, through Europe and the UK, there's one at 4 p.m. on that day. So shameless plug, but if I can't do it on my own podcast, where can I do it?
Absolutely. And I'm assuming, Kieran, that you're referencing the new established Alta education. Am I right? Indeed.
Yeah. That's it. That's me and Stuart Welsh, who's been on the podcast a few times before. Certainly did a maths panel with Lisa and possibly Shannon, I want to say. We've joined forces to sort of cover primary and secondary. I suppose maths is obviously our strong point, but obviously we've got a lot of expertise in sort of different areas like curriculum and stuff like that. So, we're trying to help schools on their development journey with sort of our combined experience of, like I say, I think working in challenging circumstances for most of, if not all of my career. And hopefully we can help others too. Yeah, so thank you for pushing it, Lloyd, because I certainly wouldn't. But I do want to modest the webinar because I've worked hard on it, and I think it's going to be worthwhile, because it really looks in forensic detail at how we can be effective. So no matter what you use, here's some principles you can use to help all pupils learn their number bonds. And it's not necessarily looking at the understanding aspect, because that should be baked into your curriculum, but it's that little and often stuff that Suchmo and I talked about way back. Yeah, all I have to do is say thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.
ha ha ha!